that's permanently or whether just on a temporary basis. This can ensure that students can work together more effectively, but also whilst remaining COVID secure. Now, 4 particular layouts which we can consider using. Again, we may be familiar with many of these layouts, but in my experience, we very rarely see these changes in a classroom. It's very rare for a teacher to use one of these. We have the U or W shape, the islands setup, the mirror or parliament setup, and then the backs to the wall. All of these layouts say different things about teaching. You know, the island says, I want you to work together and take responsibility in your groups. The mirror setup says, I want you to talk to each other and debate and discuss. The backs to the wall setup says, the emphasis is on speaking. And then when we need to write, we can turn around and do that. So whilst classrooms may be restricted in terms of space, I think there are many things that we can do that we know about, that we're aware of, but we don't really do on a regular basis. And this relates also to the idea of democratizing space within the classroom. To maximize student learning experience and outcomes, we should look at both the overt as well as the covert hierarchies within the classroom, the obvious hierarchies, but also the hidden or secret ones. And again, questions to ask, things like, do you need a teacher's desk? Are there best places to sit? And if so, do the same students always sit there? And are seating arrangements inclusive? So these are some of the questions, and hopefully in this session today, I'm going to be asking more questions than possibly giving answers. But I think as professionals, this is what we need to do, and to reimagine the space, the physical space of the classroom. And we can also consider letting students co-own the space. So things like letting students curate the pictures and posters on the walls, giving them that responsibility and the power that that brings, and the pride in seeing their work on the walls. We can think about zoning in the classroom, where there may be reading areas or student-only areas. And in these student-only areas, they can be safe spaces. So if a student is feeling upset or overwhelmed, they can go to that space and self-regulate. Again, we are democratizing the space. We are giving students that opportunity to work it out for themselves. Another way we can improve the classroom atmosphere, again, thinking more laterally, there's a fantastic scheme called Bring Your Own Plant that I was made aware of recently, where students all would bring their own plant into the classroom. And what this can develop is skills like empathy, care, but it also provides a better physical atmosphere. There is simply more oxygen in the room, and that can create better learning outcomes as well. We don't have time now to play this extract, but it's on the slides for you to think about. This is a student called Kiefer in Dubai, and she shares her experience of this. And the other point I want to make about the physical classroom is thinking about the physical and the digital. For so long, we have seen them as separate things. But I think what COVID may have taught us is about the importance and the value of digital education, and how we can look at now integrating it with face-to-face education in the future. So why is this important? Well, it can help with the transition from COVID era learning. If your students have been more familiar with the digital, this will help. If we can use mobile phones within the classroom, it can help in that way. Students can become more independent. It also prepares them more authentically for future workplaces. In their future jobs, they may well, almost 100% likely to be using mobile devices, digital devices. So let's practice now so that they can do that. And it also gives teachers more time to give that face-to-face support to students who really need it. And the what of this, so what does this mean? What would this look like? Well, the writing tasks become more authentic. You know, we can set them WhatsApp tasks to use, for example, get them writing emails rather than essays. What it can also do is create a digital record of speaking and writing so that they can refer to that and see their own progress. And it also allows for task repetition, and it also means that we are using more meaningful and authentic texts. And just some other ideas finally in this section to think about how we can optimize the physical space. Painting with a bright white paint, letting students dress more appropriately for exams so they feel more comfortable. Again, this small change can impact positively on that experience. And seeing corridors and communal spaces as opportunities for interaction, those sort of natural, incidental movements and meetings that students can come across. Okay, so the second space I'd like to talk about is the mental space. One of the most prevalent governmental and institutional messages that we have seen as we talk about a return to face-to-face teaching is about building back better. But I think this is a fairly sort of cliched thing. We don't really know what this means. This quotation here from Anna Regal, though it is appealing as an idea, the Build Back Better framework is a little opaque. It's difficult to see what it means. It has necessarily evolved as a reaction to and in support of responses to all types of disaster. And when we think about coming back to education after COVID, I think we need to be a little bit more specific about what we're thinking. And I think there really are two foundational questions we need to address, which is what is education for, and what is the best way of realizing this vision? And one thing that I think that it's important for us to try and do is to address what I call educational leviathans. So with this phrase, I mean, the original word as a leviathan was a sea monster. It was the title of a very well-known book of political philosophy by Thomas Hobbes, as you can see there. But the way I use this term is to talk about those features of education systems which are deeply embedded in the DNA of ministries and schools. These educational leviathans are the norms, the rules, the processes, the perceptions, the ways of being, the hierarchies, the values, and the hidden curricula, which people are often very afraid to challenge. And some of these educational leviathans are generally applicable, while some may be more location specific. And if we're genuine about wanting to build back better, we need to find ways of having genuine conversations about these issues. And to illustrate this point, I'm going to look at 3 examples of educational leviathans, which I have come across in my work, systemic level education leviathans. So one in the UK is that we must have a long summer holiday. In government schools in the UK, the summer holiday is generally 6 weeks long as a minimum, and sometimes longer. And for many parents and teachers and students, it does retain popularity. But there are many good reasons why the school year should be re-evaluated, perhaps moving to a more semester type system, or 5 semesters across the year. And one of the main arguments in favor of this is because of summer slide, as it's called. So, which means students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds over that long summer holiday lose many of their academic skills and much of the knowledge which they have learnt in the previous term, in the previous year. And in so doing, the already marginalized become even more marginalized. And I think there's a real conversation to have about this, to really address these issues, to talk about this educational leviathan. Another example from my work in Lebanon, working with Syrian refugees there, we must only use the target language to teach the target language. So in working in this context, there was a very strongly held belief that English should only be taught in English, with very little or almost no use of the mother tongue. And this was despite their own languages level being fairly low. Again, but there's lots of good arguments how mother tongue can be used positively in language acquisition. Again, this is another educational leviathan which we should discuss, which we should not be afraid of tackling. And my work in Nigeria, classes should be arranged by age and not ability. Again, a very common issue. but I worked on a program there called Teaching at the Right Level. And what that program did was to mix up students in classes 3, 4, and 5, primary 3, 4, and 5, according to their level rather than their age. And some of the impacts of that were very, very important. So in trying to do this, I think it can be very challenging. And one strategy I think that can be adopted in order to really break through these educational leviathans is something called oblique strategies. Now, this was actually something created by the music producer Brian Eno, and he used it a lot when he was working with artists such as David Bowie. And what it does, it creates ways of addressing blocks where there are issues, where there are challenges which people have very strong views about. These oblique strategies allow you a way in. And these are sort of strategic questions, lateral thinking questions which we can address. So things like state the problem in words as clearly as possible, what to increase, what to reduce, remove ambiguities and convert to specifics. So some are fairly clear and obvious what they are trying to say. Others are more obscure, things like gardening, not architecture, turn it upside down, do we need holes? But what I think these oblique strategies can do is to make us think in different ways. And that's something which I think is really, really important. In order to address these educational leviathans, we sometimes need to think in these different ways. And these strategies can help with that. Again, we haven't got time to go through all of these now, but you will get the slides and you can look at them and think, perhaps some of these are useful within my particular context. Okay, so moving on now to the third space is emotional space. The COVID impact in terms of mental and emotional health is likely to be very significant. And we're not likely to see that immediately. We're much more likely to see that in a year or 2 years, the sort of full impact of that. But it's something that schools and ministries need to start thinking about now. Now, you don't need me to tell you about some of the situations in which you're working, the challenging circumstances in which you're working, and how mental and emotional health is so important. But I think the point I want to raise here is about the challenges for teachers working in this situation, and that teachers are expected to wear so many different hats. And this quotation we can see here by the writer Frank McCourt, I think really summarizes this. You know, you're a shoulder to cry on, a disciplinarian, a singer, a low-level scholar, a clerk, a referee, a clown, a counselor, a philosopher, a collaborator, a politician, a therapist, a fool, a mother, father, brother, sister, uncle, aunt, a bookkeeper, a critic, and a psychologist. All these different hats. And I think one thing that's really important is that teachers get the support which they need during this time, because teachers are at the front line of this. They are dealing with this. They are working with students who may be significantly affected during this time. So schools to support teachers in that way is a very crucial thing. One way we can do this is to provide that support through non-linguistic means, I think. So looking at the language that students use and the kind of things which students are doing. Now, teachers are not psychologists, but they are expected sometimes to be able to do that. I think emojis, as we can see here, a very common thing. People know all about emojis. We can use emojis as a way of getting students to start talking about how they feel. It's perhaps they can't use the words to do it. They can't do it in English, and they may not even be able to do it in their mother tongue either. But emojis offer a way in to be able to start that conversation. Another way of starting that conversation is to use this. It's called a blob tree. There's a link there to see many more of these. Again, students can point to the blob which they are feeling. You know, if we look at number 12 feels they are only just about hanging on. Now, number 11 is feeling okay, but number 6 is at the top of the tree is feeling lonely and isolated. So these ways in, these non-specialist emotional support can open up the conversation for students. And this is just another example of how we can embed trauma-sensitive pedagogy within our classes. So this was something I did, again, in my experience in Lebanon, of trying to link classroom practice with trauma sensitivity. So it's a way we can teach literacy, but in a therapeutic way. So you can bring up a student to the front of the class, and that student is holding the letter A, like we can see here. The teacher starts telling a story. Once upon a time, there was a letter A. The A lived on her own. And then the teacher asks the question, how do you think the A felt? The students say, oh, sad. And then the student can draw a sad face on the letter A, as we can see there. How can we make the A feel better? And you elicit from the class. So the students draw as many A's as they can in 10 seconds. So they all start writing down, write A. So they are practicing writing. They are practicing literacy. Again, ask the question, how does the A feel now? And the student who is holding the A can then change it. The student changes the sad face to a happy face. Again, with children in difficult circumstances, in difficult situations, we need to empower them. We need to make them say, you know, you can make a change. You can have a positive impact on people's lives. And this is a way that we can link the literacy with that therapeutic part. Okay, so onto our fourth space, our penultimate space, which is the learning space. And I think that COVID presents to us an opportunity to reflect more on our relationship with the natural world. And we can then bring that into the classroom. There's a nice quotation from an article which Ros Appleby, who's an Australian educationalist, said. She wrote before COVID, but it's very important now, even more important, I would say. She said, the effects of nature deficit disorder on human well-being. And she argues that the problem of alienation is specifically related to people's disconnection from local wildlife and local biodiversity. And she uses the phrase rewilding pedagogy to look at how we can bring the outside inside the classroom. And we can see here, we won't go through these now, but here's three examples of how we can do that. These are from the book that I mentioned before, Teaching in Challenging Circumstances. 3 ways of linking the outside world of the students to the classroom. So if we just look at the one at the bottom, for example, reading in interesting places. And you just give a student a book or something you want them to read, and they have to find an interesting but safe place to read. So that might be in a tree or under a bush, in some grass, and you walk around and monitor their reading. It's doing different things. It's encouraging those links with their local environment. And we can do this more explicitly as well, for example, through learning walks. So learning walks are simply, you go out with your class into the local area and you use whatever there is, whatever is in your local area to teach language. So for example, we might see here the teacher, what is this called in English? Student, a tree. Good, everyone say tree. And the teacher drills the word tree. What's this? And so on. So we can learn from that, but then we can go down lower. We see, okay, you have 1 minute to touch as many trees as you can. Every time you touch one, shout tree. So we're using total physical response here as an opportunity for students to learn. And there's various other things that we can see here. Again, in your own time afterwards, please have a look through that. And there is the things that the teacher can do at that time. Any questions, please do feel free to ask. Another activity, listen to the world, where the students go outside and we're using the sounds which are outside for learning purposes. And then one more activity as well, community mapping. So where students actually work in groups to map their local area. They draw a map, label a map of their local area. Again, there's so much learning that can take place through this, but it's also a very motivational and very empowering thing for students to do as well. They are learning and reflecting about their local area, and they are using language at the same time. And when it comes to something like, oh, I don't know the word for that, that's when they ask you. Say, teacher, what is the word for this? What is the word for that? And anytime students want the word, want the language, that is when good learning takes place.
Chris,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. Okay. So the last 5 minutes, the last space I wanted to talk about was epistemic space. So in this last section on epistemic space, I want to make the argument that we should see and not just describe the time which children have been at school as wasted. You know, in different contexts, this will be very, very different. But there are lots of areas and skills which students have acquired at a higher rate during the period of COVID than if they were in school. And here's just some ideas here. So citizenship, critical thinking, digital skills, emotional skills, financial skills, life skills, resilience, study skills, time management, and workplace skills. So it has not been wasted in many situations. You know, it's different types of knowledge, yes, but it has not been wasted. And again, what I think schools need to do when children return to face learning is to encourage opportunities for sharing this knowledge, for them to show to each other what they have learned, to tell their teachers what they have learned, because these skills will not have been developed equally. You know, some students would have developed many of these skills, lots of students will not. So we need to look at how this knowledge can be redistributed between students. And again, what we are doing, we are placing the learner at the center of this process. It's not coming from the teacher, it's not coming from the principal, it's not coming from those hierarchies, it's coming from the learners themselves and sharing this information. You could even think about having a student takeover day in school where they do this, where they lead the learning for that particular day. And this is reflected in things like Stephen Heppel, who is a very important, influential educationalist. On this website here, he talks about the golden generation of these children because they have been able to develop skills which previous generations haven't. And you can actually download a certificate there to say you're part of this golden generation and to record some of those experiences, to validate some of those experiences. And the last part in this section is just talking about assessment. Assessment is obviously crucial in education systems, but I think what COVID offers us is an opportunity to reassess assessment. And there's lots of different ways we can do this. So, for example, we are looking from just a single body to a broad consortium in terms of the source of credentials, or we are looking at the nature of the learning, moving from an individual shallow form of learning to a deeper and wider form of learning here. And as I say, there's a very interesting article you can read there, which outlines some of these main points. Okay, so I know this was a bit of a quick tour of some of these different ideas, but I was very keen in the half an hour I had to share as many of those ideas as possible with you. And as I say, you can have the slides, you can look over them and look at some of the things which we didn't look at in detail. If you have any questions or comments that you would like to make about this, please do feel free to contact me, and I will happily respond to any of those questions that you have. But for now, thank you very much for your time and for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of the conference. So thank you very much, and all best wishes.
Thank you, Chris, for this enlightening and inspiring presentation on how teachers and educational leaders can make meaningful changes in the post-pandemic era. It was a pleasure to explore those 5 spaces for learner well-being in the new era. Thank you again. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Kim Inslee, teacher. Presentation title is Empowering Teachers, Lessons Post-COVID. Kim Inslee is a lecturer in education at UCL, Institute of Education, the World for Education Research and as part of University College London, a member institute of University of London worldwide. Kim is a program director of the PGCE Teacher Development Program taught through the University of London worldwide, a fully online professional development program for teachers. Welcome, Kim. Thank you for joining us today. It is a pleasure having you at ICET. The stage is yours. Birame Beres, brochure كلا presentation translation كراو بو كردي وعربي أجاوستان تهبكن. زور سپاس.
Appears.
I believe I am sharing them. Hang on, let me try again. Can you see those?
Yes, very clear. Thank you, Kim.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. So I'm delighted to be here and have the opportunity to present this morning. I've already been introduced. I'm actually a lecturer at UCL Institute of Education, where I've worked for at least 24 years. But I'm presenting this morning through, though, as a representative of the University of London worldwide programs. The program was introduced and mentioned earlier. The picture on the left here is that of Senate House, which is an iconic building in central London. The University of London being the first non-religious university in the UK after Oxford and Cambridge, and the first to offer distance learning programs worldwide. It is a federation of member institutions. So as itself, it has no teaching faculty as such. The teaching comes from the member institutions, and University College London, UCL, is one of those. The Institute of Education, or the IOE, is now a faculty of UCL, having previously been a small single subject university before it merged with the UCL in December 2014. And also earlier that year, we became #1 in the world for education research. And we've actually held that position, the IOE, ever since. So my role is as a leader in my Department for Innovation and Enterprise, and I'm a leader of a number of teacher education programs, and all of these are informing my presentation today. Top of that list is, as has already been mentioned, the PGCE Teacher Development, available through the University of London worldwide. This program, developed over 2 years, starting in 2013, first ran in 2015. It's been developed into a low-cost program as a response to the IOE mission to reach out worldwide and offer teacher education programs to those who might not be able to afford to live in London or to pay the higher fees at UCL. There's another element that is important, though. We recognise that teaching is being developed across the world, and teachers and teacher educators are experts in their own countries. They know the needs and challenges of their own countries far better than we do. And so this programme was developed with that recognition, allowing teachers to lead their own professional development. Uniquely, it asks teacher participants to choose their own critical friend, to observe their practice and help them improve it. The programme offers a scaffolding or framework to enable that. Learning is examined in the first module, with the second considering assessment and inclusion strategies and practices before returning to learning in looking at the reflective practitioner. This structure underpins my talk this morning. Other professional development I'm involved in includes an MA and graduate diploma programme at the IOE, and also experiences globally through the IPGCE in India and Dubai, through continuing professional development courses in Pakistan, India, China and the UK. And I've also led consultancy projects globally, particularly in Armenia, Myanmar, and in Jordan. So enough about me. The title of my presentation is Empowering Teachers, Lessons Post-COVID. To begin then, I need to say what I mean by empowering teachers. And I have to acknowledge Chris's first presentation, where a lot of the things he gave, a lot of the examples were very much situated in empowered teachers. The research is clear about teacher education, and I'm going to emphasize education, not training. Like most professionals, teachers need to be responsible for their activity, for what they do, not governments. Governmental policies will, of course, support this, but governments cannot be involved in the day-to-day reality of the classroom. That is the role of the teacher. Training helps teachers solve specific problems. But those of us who are teachers know that we cannot foresee every problem. So teachers need to be educated to solve their own problems as they occur. Teacher education, which is situated in research, both empirical research, that's research that works, and theoretical research, I call that research that could work, is more effective in achieving all of this than mere training. Some research also situates that in communities of practice. So, gone is the lone teacher, the sage on the stage, or the hero teacher. These are, of course, individuals who are fantastic teachers, but they reach this through being a part of that community of practice, the community of learners, where they work with others. And importantly, the strategy of exploring and reflecting on practice and getting it wrong. That's really important, I think. Often together, the two are part of the toolbox of the empowered teacher. So let's consider some of these aspects in the challenge of COVID-19. The empowered teacher, I argue, was able to respond to the needs of online teaching. Oh, I know new skills had to be learned. We need to learn new skills all of our lives. But the challenges of online teaching, as many schools globally were there, because many schools globally had to close down. They had to prevent the spread of that disease. These challenges of online teaching were better managed, though, by the empowered teacher, the teachers who could solve their own problems, who didn't, as Alga suggests, return to form, to teaching as they were taught. The challenges moved on. We got better at what we were doing as we did it. We also had the community of colleagues' expertise to turn to. There was the danger of telling, as I've mentioned, or teaching at the children, what Watkins and colleagues called instruction, which you can see in this first cycle. Instruction works and is always necessary, but it is limiting. And those teachers who did focus in their online teaching on mainly telling their students information, again, what Alga calls reverting to form, soon found it difficult to keep their students interested and focused in their learning. Effective learning, as Watkins and colleagues identifies, includes construction and co-construction. These are the two cycles. But we had a challenge. Students were at home without their peers, so co-construction was more difficult. I've included this diagram from Watkins and colleagues as it shows the role of the teacher. And I'm not going to talk through it, but leave you to look at the different modes of the teacher and the learners. It's based on a simple cycle of learning: do, review, learn, apply. And the three diagrams show the increasing sophistication in the role of learners and teachers. My perception is that during COVID-19, the first cycle was much more predominant, with the second cycle, construction, occurring more where learners had been experiencing effective learning in the classroom. Co-construction, the third cycle, was much more difficult to achieve given the learners' isolation. Post-COVID, I argue, we should be working towards more co-construction in order to enhance opportunities for learning and ensure that catch-up. Another challenge, of course, has been the different pedagogies needed for different age groups. I've identified three different aspects which I believe were really affecting learning during COVID online teaching, particularly for when you think that there were preschool, primary or elementary school, and language learners. Those are the three areas that were being challenged. In some countries, for example, I've discovered that the language of instruction may not be the first or home language of the students. So whilst the student may have a good literacy in their home language, this may not be the case for the language of instruction. Examples of that I've seen are, for example, in Germany, in Austria, where German is the language of instruction, but a dialect of German, some might call it, others would argue it is Austrian, is the language at home. I also found it with Arabic in Middle Eastern countries, where classic Arabic is the language of instruction in the classroom, but the home language may be quite different to that language of instruction. These challenges lead to understanding and having the tools of learning, the reading and writing. Could the children actually read and write? Very young children can be focused when they're motivated. I remember my 9-month son very happily sitting for 40 minutes in a playpen, playing with things that were interesting him, fascinating him. He didn't need me to be there. But achieving that motivation without adult support can be difficult. And of course, because learning is difficult and should be challenging by its very nature, this makes the learning online even more difficult. So I previously mentioned the skills development as a consequence of COVID-19, and I've sort of set them out here, some of those tools that we may have achieved. I think post-COVID-19 will be us as teachers recognizing some of these tools and the skills we have now developed and have been enhanced, continuing to enhance the learning as we go forward. So we teachers need to keep hold of the elements that we've learnt to use and blend them into our teaching going forward. Otherwise, what a waste of learning if we don't, even if you like, an irresponsibility. I've actually recently challenged one of my colleagues in an online meeting when he commented that he was just going to do what he'd always done, lecture every week. At a university level, we are being encouraged to develop blended learning. And even those of us whose courses have been fully online for a long time can blend our learning to use more virtual face-to-face, for example. And schools? Well, think about how these tools that are on the slide here these newfound skills that we've got, together the two can enhance our face-to-face teaching. Perhaps we can do more group work. So working with a focus group while other groups are working more independently because they've learned to do that using these tools. Perhaps homework can change or flipped classroom activities could be enhanced. There are limitations. Another consequence of COVID has been the usage of the internet and devices. This chart shows that as of January 2021, 59% of people globally, that's 4.9 billion people, were using the internet. Unfortunately, the same statistics had not been previously collected, so it's actually very difficult to make comparisons back about what was happening before. We do know that in 2020, Asia was the region with the largest number of online users at 2.5 billion users. Statistics are limited in being informative, and this does not really tell us a lot. What we do know, though, is that usage is affected by the skills of the users. And these will be different for students, for the parents, and for the teachers. In particular, what users do with their engagement is not considered in the statistics. The chart shows internet, social media, and mobile users. It doesn't say anything about the quality of that use. And this is one of the major limitations of statistical research. It number counts, but does little else. So thinking forward now, post-COVID, professional development for teachers going forward must first be situated in professionalism. This can be measured in a number of ways, including the licensing of teachers against standards or a competency framework, which may include some form of supervision or inspection. This is a top-down model imposed on teachers. Previously, I suggested that teachers, like other professionals, should be responsible for their profession. And the first important point is that our professional development is continuing. We cannot ever know everything about learning, but effective learning means starting where the learner is, which is no different for our children, students, or for the teacher professionals. To consider this continuing professional development, I've chosen to talk about just 4 elements which have been identified in the research literature. Jean Murray was one of the first to write about teacher education as being different from teaching. She identified in her doctoral thesis the concept of first order teaching, how to teach students, that is pedagogy, and then articulated second order teaching, how to teach teachers to teach students, which is a different set of pedagogies. She was, of course, building on pioneers in education. One example is Donald Shon, who talked very much theorizing about teachers reflecting on and in practice. Effective teachers, he argued, evaluate their teaching, what went well and why it went well, what didn't go as well and why it didn't go as well. But the most effective teachers reflect in practice whilst they are teaching and adapt to the feedback they receive from their students. And intuition is important here, being open to or even challenged by our students, being open to what we are doing as we do it because it isn't working, reflecting in practice. Of course, to achieve this, we do need to be informed. And Philip accordingly argued that teachers' own learning is key to their capacity to respond to new demands. She showed that professional learning needed to be central to improving education for all. This could and should be through short courses, accredited continuing professional development, which empowers teachers to further empower their students, their learners. Finally, Jean, Lave and Etengvanga identified the concept of community of practice and argued that within that community, it was accepted to be a watcher, a learner, what they called a legitimate peripheral participant. The types of participation in the community of practice, though, have been developed and certainly inform my own practices in consultancy and professional development teaching. Teachers are experts in their classrooms. They know their students better than governments, inspectors, even their principals or head teachers, and certainly better than the perceived expert coming in to lecture. But effective teachers are aware of their professional needs. As peripheral participants in their continuing professional development, they bring the expertise of their classrooms or culture and adapt and critically engage with the new learning, underpinned by both empirical and theoretical research. And a particular participation in that community of learners is the teacher as researcher. This is practitioner research, situated in the context of the classroom or the school. It's developed out of the Shon reflection in and on practice that I've already talked about. Practitioner research can be through different modes of research. Case study, in particular, focuses on a child or an aspect such as an intervention, and is a well-recognizable piece of research in the scientific community. It isn't generalizable, though. It can't be, so this works for me, therefore it will work with everybody. And that's quite an important aspect of a lot of practitioner research. Case study, though, is very much a recognized scientific research. Action research, though, was developed from the teaching profession, and it has 4 key elements. Those elements being, as I've written there, change in practice, a cycle, so where you revisit and think about that practice, co-researchers who may be the students in your classroom or other teachers, and also yourself as an insider researcher. You're looking at your own practice, therefore you're biased because of course you've chosen to work in that way. It does have challenges, and those include the fact that the practice is happening to everyone. So the practice is part of the research, but you can't, the children in particular, can't opt out of being taught. Whereas in terms of research, ethically, they can opt out of the actual research. And teachers, yes?
Sorry to interrupt your presentation. I'd like to remind you that we have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, that's lovely. Of course, the ethics are, we're ethical as professionals, but the research ethics are slightly different as well. And then finally, there's a colleague of mine, Dylan William, at he's an emeritus professor at Institute of Education. He's famous for working on assessment for learning, but he also was a great advocate of teacher as researcher, until recently that is, when he realized that, argues that teachers should be teachers and researchers should be researchers. I actually don't agree with him, particularly because the language of research is often inaccessible to teachers. And I feel that without teachers doing their own research, we won't achieve further. So in conclusion, I've sort of pulled together what I think is really important going forward: effective professional development, because it's relevant to and must be situated in the context. It involves inquiry, exploration and reflection on practice, which may or may not be research, and it's underpinned by research. And good professional development helps busy teachers understand the research. Post-COVID then, we've all been upskilled, particularly in IT tools. There are expectations of effective teaching which have changed, but I strongly believe that empowered teachers can respond more effectively to change. And if there's another pandemic, if things change again, it will be the empowered teachers who make those changes in their practice. Thank you very much indeed. The next slides on my PowerPoint are all my references, so you can read the evidence for yourself if you wish. Or why not join the PGCE Teacher Development? The first one of my early slides had the link to the University of London worldwide link. Applications are open for a September start. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Kim, for this mind-opening presentation and how successful teachers have been able to adapt their pedagogies to support online teaching. It was inspiring to explore new skills teachers may have needed to learn to adapt their pedagogies. All the recordings and presentations will be available on www.teachersacademy.uk, and an announcement will be made on Sterling social media when ready. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for honoring us at the reception of the International Conference on Education and Teaching in K-12 Schools ICET21. 38 more excellent and inspiring webinars are waiting for you in our online sessions in these 2 days. The online closing ceremony will be tomorrow at 3 p.m. with an enlightening closing keynote by Geeta, an international educational expert from London. Her presentation title is Transformations to Adapt to Global Disruptions. Do not miss out. We would like to thank once again to the organizing committee, our main supporting partners being Ministries of Education of Republic of Iraq and Kurdistan, British Embassy Baghdad and British Consulate General Erbil, IBBC, also our sponsors, Finest Way Company, EduZone International, Mercury School Information System, and Meetgate Online Conference Platform. Great thanks and appreciation to prominent national and international universities and institutions who contributed to ICET as a supporting partner in no specific order. UK Teachers Academy, University of London, Salahuddin University, University of Kirkuk, University of Duhok, Tishk International University, Cambridge Assessment, American University of Iraq Suleimani, University of Basra, University of Baghdad, Koya University, Soran University, Broadlands, University of Mosul, University Suleimani, Qamar University of Science and Technology, Mustansiriyah University, Al Nahrain University, University of Halabja, Dijlah University, University of Zaho. Thank you all for your invaluable contribution and support. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the opening ceremony of the International Conference on Education and Teaching in K-12 Schools, ICET 2021. The organizing committee invites you to lunch now. Lunch is being served in the International Restaurant. To get to the restaurant, you can use the lift to floor M or take the stairs up after passing the reception. Lavatories are available by the reception. The restaurant will open at 12:15 and the lunch will be served at 12:30. We are looking forward to seeing you in our online sessions. Thank you very much. إلى برس استا كاتينا خواردنا ساعة 12:30 دقيقة لريستورانتي لسروايا. Ska jag persertan här på personer gatan på Epshandeden. Zor spas.